Um, Hi, hello
Hi.
everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you all for joining us for today's masterclass, and thank you to our special guest, Katie Quesada, for joining us. Before we get started, just do a bit of housekeeping. Just wanted to say hello and welcome back to our old friends and community members who've been here before. Say a big welcome to those of you who are new to this space. My name is Katie Mack, and I'm on the community team here at the Mom Project. At the Mom Project, we're dedicated to helping moms, dads, caregivers, and allies unlock meaningful career outcomes that align with their personal and professional priorities. And we accomplish this by connecting you all with job opportunities with vetted, family-friendly companies via our careers marketplace, as well as via our community offerings, which includes content, peer-to-peer connections, mentoring, specialized programs, and events just like this one. We are beyond excited for today's session. So tell me about yourself. We realize it can be hard to effectively and succinctly talk about yourself, but it's an important part of applying and interviewing for jobs, networking, and just about everything in between. So we are beyond excited to have Katie Quesada, storytelling expert, join us for today's session and share her expertise. Before we get started, just a little more housekeeping. This session is part of our Summer School the Remix campaign, which was designed to provide you with timely and free immersive curriculum designed to help you level up your professional profile. If you aren't already following along, we will drop the program link here in the chat. New curriculum drops each Monday. So next session starts next Monday. Anyway, we will be getting to a Q&A at the end of the session, but please feel free to drop your questions, comments, whatever in the chat along the way, and we will tackle as many as we can. For those of you who may have to drop early, don't worry, we'll send a follow-up email after this with recordings so you can watch on your own time if you RSVP to this. And then for those of you who want to get in touch with Katie following today's session, we'll also be sending some info about ways you can get in touch with her. And yeah, I mean, I think that's all of it. That's a big spiel to get out. I feel like it's always like in the beginning. There was one other thing I was just thinking about, and it'll come back to me. So in that case, Katie, I'm so excited to have you here, and I would love to pass the mic to you to kick things off.
Yeah, hi everyone. Hello, the Mom Project community. It's so great to be together. I am now new to this community, but I already love it. I'm like, oh, these are all the things that I've been wondering for years. And I have so many questions, and now they're in a hub. So I'm happy to be here together. It's going to be a fun hour. It's just going to be us talking about storytelling and how we tell stories at work and in interviews and at the dinner table and what that feels like. And a lot of that boils down to this initial question. So tell me about yourself. So I'm just going to go through some basics of storytelling, why storytelling matters, how to answer this question, and then we're going to do some Q&A together. So if you're on your lunch break and eating a salad really quickly or a giant cheeseburger or whatever you're eating, that's great. It's 11 where I am. I'm in Orange County, California, but I know it's 1 where you are, Katie, right? And I'm sure it's like 6 p.m. for someone and they're enjoying a glass of wine watching this YouTube. You're lucky. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I'm so glad you're here watching live. And my hope is that at the end of this 1 hour, you feel like, oh, okay, I can answer that question. That's what my hope is. So it's going to be really tangible and practical. So if you have a pen and paper, I'm a pen and paper person, grab it. And in the end, we're actually going to start like writing things down together. Yes, Katie's on it. Katie's, both of us. So grab a pen and paper. That's all you're going to need. It's just going to be a really quick session together on this kind of basics of storytelling and what it is. And it would be amiss if I didn't start with my own story. So I'd love to tell you a little bit about my own life and my own story. And then we'll dive into why storytelling matters and how to do it. So my name is Katie Quesada. As I said, I'm from Orange County, California. I spent the last 5 years living in LA. And this business, this idea of story coaching and consulting was born 3 years ago now. I've had this company almost 4 years, and it's absolutely a job I made up. So I made up this job. I said, this is what I do for a living. And thankfully it worked. But it all started because 4 or 5 years ago, I was a part of this really high level organization. And a part of what I did there is I put on these huge events for women. And they were every other month, and I would speak at them, or I'd bring in speakers, and they were fun and great. But at one of these events, I brought in a woman named Dr. Tama Bryant Davis out of Pepperdine University. She's incredible. And she said in the middle of an event on a Friday night, she said, did you know that there is a Barnes and Noble of untold stories here in this room? And I felt this like real conviction, honestly. I felt like, oh, I shouldn't speak at these things anymore, and I shouldn't bring in speakers. I need to teach more ordinary people to tell their stories. That we're like really missing stories when we just hear the same stories 5 times, and that we're really missing something culturally in our environment, in our homes, in our families, in our organizations, when we just keep hearing the same one person tell their story 10 times in a row. That we are all better when more stories are told. So I flipped the script on those events. I got all the permission from the powers that be. And for the next three years, every other month we had these events. For the next 3 years, behind the scenes of the events, I would coach 3 women to tell their personal story in 8 minutes. And then that's who spoke at all these events. So it was around a theme. So once we had a theme for the organization or whatever that was, the company wanted, then they would tell their personal story in 8 minutes. And when, as this was all happening, things were growing and exploding, I was a part of a startup environment with a young baby, which maybe some of you know how that feels. And things were getting out of hand. I was working too many hours. It was getting really, really hard. My own life, I was like, oh no, this is not sustainable anymore. The company was like expecting more of me, and I was wanting to give less, like all these things that I'll share in this space, because I know a lot of you know how that feels. I was like, oh no, I think I need to quit my job. And someone said to me, oh, aren't you going to miss speaking at these events? And I said, no, I think I'm going to miss coaching at these events. And I said that, I realized it as I said it out loud. Meanwhile, a part of this is that my husband and I had been both working full time and saving for a house, and we were living in LA, like a very high cost of living area. And so it was going to take a long time to save money to buy a house, which is like a big dream of ours. And we were like, how are we going to do that if I'm supposed to quit my job? And really long, wild story short, at the same time, we had bought an RV with a group of friends, like an old junky 1990s RV. And we had renovated it. And so we were like taking it on trips and having so much fun with it. It was like the beautiful part of that really hard season. And we came back from one of the trips, and my husband said, do you think that you could live in an RV? And I was like, I think I could live in an RV. And we were like, maybe. So we started laughing about it. And then I started to follow a lot of people on Instagram who lived in RVs full time. And then 2 weeks later, this really influential girl on Instagram went live and said, we're selling our RV. And my husband and I said we wanted it. And we sold 90% of what we owned and moved into an RV full time for the last 2 years to save for the house we just bought. So the last 3 years have been a whirlwind. I'll show you guys a picture so you can see my little family and see what I'm talking about. So this is my little family. We actually moved into the RV with just my older daughter, Gracie. And at the time I was like working too many hours. We actually were really struggling with secondary infertility. I had multiple miscarriages. I was like, I'm never going to get pregnant again. Let's move into this RV because it's only the 3 of us. And then 2 weeks later, I got pregnant. So then I had my second daughter in the RV. It was beautiful and like such an amazing season for us. I launched my business out of this RV. I met with executive clients, and the background was like an RV bunk room. Like, it was like, yeah, I live in here and this is what I do for a living. And thankfully it was such a great time for us. We're still minimalist to this day. Like, we learned so much about stuff and space and time and a lot of things, but it's a big part of our story and it always will be. So now we live in a normal sticks and bricks house is what RV people call it. A normal house. And we love it. We're in Orange now, closer to our families, and the company is thankfully thriving, and that's where I'm at. So now what I do is I help people and companies tell better stories. And what that kind of is in a nutshell is I help people say less things in a more compelling way. So that is kind of what it kind of comes down to, is like for companies, like, I want to talk about all these things. I'm like, okay, well, we can't, let's talk about a couple of them. And then with individuals, our own stories are very hard to talk about because we lived them. So we don't even know where to begin. And when we talk about where to begin, that ends up happening with a lot of my clients. So a lot of my high-level clients are like executive interview coaching, public speaking, writing their TED Talk, their presentation, whatever that is. A lot of those clients, when I ask them, so tell me about yourself, I have had a client come to me with a 7-page document that's an answer to that question. And I have had a client who's like, I don't know, it's no big deal. And all across the board, I've realized that question, first of all, if you're in this space, a lot of you are in as a part of the Mom Project, you are maybe in an interview space, or you're in a networking connection space, or you just want to grow your business space, you are going to get asked this question 1,000 times. And I think it's a question that we think so little about. And it's a question that isn't looking for information, it's looking for an impression. You need to make an impression with this question. And I think it really is a question that deserves a story as an answer. So storytelling is really a lot. I'm going to go through this slideshow in this weird non-played way, because then you can see it better, and then you don't get as small. So just so you know, I know that this is happening, but it's fine. So this idea of storytelling and story coaching and why storytelling matters is, and this is what Katie and I were talking about before this call, and really have been thinking about it with the Mom Project, is that a couple years ago, the corporate space was way more private. It's just true. Like, 5 or 10 years ago, it was like, I go to my job, I don't know anything about my boss. I might meet her husband at one Christmas party. Other than that, I will never know anything about her personal life. Or I have a coworker and I see him 40 hours a week and I have no idea anything about his home life. And that used to be true, but honestly, the times are changing. Like 2020 changed us. People care more about stories. Brene Brown is radically reshaping this entire environment in the corporate world and the leadership structure. We are seeing that it's proven across the board that when coworkers and companies know each other's stories, they work better together. We know that getting to know people really helps us lead together better. It creates high trust environments. When we can figure out a professional and profound way to tell our stories, it creates connection and trust. Fact. It is just true across the board that when you get to know people, you have more empathy. When you have more empathy, you can care for them. We can work together better. There's an incredible study out of the University of Ohio where they put 100 people in one room and 100 people in another room. And in one room, they presented a certain amount of information just in numbers and facts. And then in the other room, they presented the exact same information just through stories. And in the room where they heard stories, 100% of the time, people responded, changed their opinion, or acted faster. 100% of the time. So we know that numbers and facts work, we know that, but they do not work anywhere near as well as stories. Storytelling is what changes our opinion, it leads to action, it creates empathy. There is so much richness to storytelling. And so in this, and I could talk about that all day long, this is all I do, but for this tiny amount of time we have together, I'm going to talk about your own personal story and how to tell it in a way that's concise. So I have to start with storytelling ground rules because this is too big of a word and there's too much happening here. So I have to really give us a foundation. The storytelling ground rules are what I do with all my clients in my workshops, retreats, but this is just 3 out of 15 that I have because this is a tiny micro event. But number one, great storytellers are interested before they are interesting. So if you want to be a really, really good storyteller, then I'm going to give you this little magic trick. It's these 3 words. And the 3 words are, tell me more. If you want to be a great storyteller, you have to be ready to listen to other people's stories. You have to be ready to hear your coworker stories and that random lady who works in your office who brings smelly food and that weird guy who wants to tell you about his video games for 19 minutes. Whatever that is, you have to be prepared to be interested if you want to be someone who is interesting. And when you become a person who is interested, it really helps to grow in your knowledge and your awareness, and it will really help you become a better storyteller because you'll hear more stories, which is just a wild thing. The more stories you hear, the more you recognize you're listening to stories, the better storyteller you'll become. The second one is the question is not who will listen to my story. The question is who can my story serve? And that's just a big philosophical thing for how we talk about storytelling, because we don't just want to come up with our story in the way that's the most likable or clickbait. We want to come up with our story in the way that is most transformative and connecting and can create real authentic leadership. And when we think about it that way, we have to think about who will it serve? Who does this help? How does this help them? What have I experienced and how can I help someone in my work environment through what that's like? What does that feel like? It's just a really important part of what we do. The last one is today we will not find your story. This is kind of a letdown for some of my clients who hire me to craft up a perfect story. And the first session I have to tell them, oh, I don't believe that you have a story. I think that we are all an evolving collection of narratives. So I think that we tend to want to pigeonhole each other. I'm Katie, the storytelling coach. You are this, the nutritionist. You are this. All I am is an accountant. I am just the girl who survived that car accident. I am just the brand strategist who works with makeup. I am just. But truly, I think that when we can think about ourselves and our stories more openly, we allow other people to have more open stories as well. You are an evolving collection of narratives. If you had a story 3 years ago and now you've had a baby and you've been home for a year and you're like, what is my story now? You're allowed to have more stories. You're allowed to stop telling that story from before. Sometimes the work that I do with clients is just saying, you don't have to tell that story anymore. That story might not serve you. That story that you've been telling at work for 9 years, maybe it's kind of tired. Maybe you're done with that story. Maybe it's time to think about what your new stories are and how to craft them and how to work through that together. This quote is just...
Sorry, I was just going to say, I love that because we around here, right? Our journeys, they're not linear. And yeah, we goes in every different direction. So I love that being able to say what's my news story? You don't have to keep sticking with your story from the past. So I think that's super empowering. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And I think I appreciate that feedback. And I think a lot of people really don't like when their story isn't linear, and it really trips them up. It's like, no, the guy in my office gets to say, I've been in this industry for 14 years and climbing ever since. And I have to say, like, I was at JP Sarah, and then I moved to, like I have this windy story, where in fact, when you learn how to re-story something and like create it in a way that is really confident and positive, you can say back to that story, oh yeah, I have 5 years of experience at 4 different organizations, which has given me a lot of knowledge that I can really use here. And that is a confident way to say my story was windy, because you're right. You have a lot more experience than 14 years at JA Guy, like you have a lot of experience you can really bring to the table as a parent, as a caregiver, as an executive, as a lawyer, whatever it is. Like when we can really confidently own our experiences, because our experiences have given us new stories and new knowledge, and we can really contribute that to the workforce, wins across the board. I say the word restory, and I want to define that here. So this is a quote that has really shaped how I do story crafting, but it says, think about the word destroy. Do you know what it is? It's to de-story, destroy. And you see restore, that's re-story. Did you know the only 2 things that have been proven to help survivors of the Holocaust? Hugging is one, and telling their story is another. Being touched and touching, telling your story is touching, and it will set you free. The root word of restore is to re-story something. And the root word of destroy is to de-story something, which I did not know. And it's really a mind-boggling thought that we can really think through. Like, people have survived very traumatic events and they have to restory them. And when you can restory them, it puts you as the hero and the narrator. And when you can do that inner work, that big inner work of becoming the hero and the narrator of your own story, you can really begin to restory what happened to you. And I love that quote so much, because I think for a lot of us, we have experienced a lot of de-storying in the last year. Like 2020 was everyone's de-story year. It went the way nobody thought. Like whatever idea I had about 2020, it is now different. So I have to restory it. I have to say, like, I was laid off, but I was able to focus on my family, and I learned a lot of new skills in this way. And you have to really be able to hold that space of like, how do I restory what just happened? Because I only can see de-storying is a huge part of the work that I do, but also it's just the inner work of how we tell the stories of what we're living and what it feels like to be a new mom, and how to experience all of that is so deep in our restorying. One of the questions that got asked in the question chat before this session, you guys emailed them in, is how do I find my best stories? And I love that question. I think that's amazing. I do an exercise called story mapping with all my clients, where we look back on your life and identify them. But the little tidbit I can give to that right now that's important is think about a micro versus a macro story. So a micro story is an event. A macro story is a value. So for a lot of people, they focus too much on their micro stories. So like clients say, Katie, I survived stage 4 cancer. I'm a cancer survivor. I want to talk about cancer. Cancer is my story. And I get to say to that client, okay, what did you learn from that experience? And they get to say, oh, I think resiliency. And now the story is actually a macro story. It's about resiliency. And I get to come into that story, even though I've never had stage 4 cancer. So we have to take these events, especially these workplace events. This is great for interview skills. If you're like, oh, this one time I led a team and we made $1 million. That's great. That's an event. But the macro story is I led a team, learned leadership, and I figured out what it looks like to create a profitable company and really be passionate about what I do. That second thing really leaned into the values there, what you value. You value leadership, you value teamwork, you value profit, you value professionalism, as opposed to just here's an event. Let me tell you what I took from that event. And when you can start to really craft that, that helps people come into your stories. Really great storytellers, when they're talking, you end up thinking about yourself and you don't know why. You're like, all of a sudden I'm thinking about me, but it's because they give you spaces to enter their story, which is just a really important part of what we do. So we're going to talk about next, what type of storyteller are you? Katie, is there anything in the chat or anything I need to answer? Thoughts?
No, just a lot of positive responses to the quote you shared before. No questions yet, but people are feeling all of this. So keep the good stuff coming, please.
Great. So I'm going to dive into what type of storyteller you are. This is going to help tee up your answer to the question. So tell me about yourself. It'll help you kind of think through how you tell stories, where you tell stories. An important part of this next section is there's an amazing quote that really is foundational for what I do in work. But the quote is, the question is not whether or not you are telling stories. The question is, do you know what stories you're telling? All of us at all times are telling stories. We are telling stories to ourselves. I call it the rough draft. We are telling stories to our kids. We are telling stories to our spouses. We are telling stories to our employers. All the time, our actions, our life, and our stories are telling stories. So when I put this in context, think about this in all the stories you're telling. We're telling stories at dinner tables, in interviews, with our employees, with the people we want to work with. We are always telling stories. So what type of storyteller are you? This is like a silly way to look at it, but it's helpful for me in thinking through how I tell a story. So each one of these people is a different type of storyteller, and each one of these people is based off of somebody in my actual life who they have allowed me to talk through this with them and really figure this out. This is not their real names. They've been protected. But the first one is Detailed Devin. And this person, Detailed Devin, she gives way too much context in her storytelling. And this is one of my real life friends, and we've joked about this endlessly. But this is how she tells stories. Detailed Devin, this might be you. Okay, so it was 2012, 13. It was 2013, and I was working in Orange. I was testing. It was really close though. But I was in the office, and it was a Thursday. I was wearing like a sweater. I was with Sarah. And like, it's been like 12 seconds, and I have no idea where you're headed with this story, right? Like, there is so much context that you feel you need to get through. This is often for really logical thinkers. So if you're an incredibly logical thinker, you might feel like I need to give them every single detail so they totally understand what's happening. When instead what's happening is that I'm drowning in your details. I'm like, where are we headed? What's the plan here? What is the story? One of my friends who does this, we laugh about it all the time. She's actually an incredible illustrator. That's her life skill. She's a drawer. But she will say like, okay, no, there was like 120. Sorry, there was 150. No, I think there's 145 people there. And I'm like, girlfriend, those details in storytelling, you need to give a general sense and a context. But if it does not change the story, whether or not it happened, you do not need to add it. So general context is usually just like who, what, where, right? That's like a baseline thing. Also, here's a quick storytelling tip. We should probably get away from dates. So dates aren't super helpful. Here, let me tell you two different stories. The year was 2005, and I was walking across the stage, and what you're thinking right now is, how old is Katie? That's what you're thinking. How old is she? How old was she in 2005? How old am I? How old was I there? Instead, when you tell a story, you can just say something like, I was 21. And when you tell your personal stories from your age, as opposed to a year, it helps people not have to do math when you start talking. So just think about yourself, a season. You can say a couple years ago. You can say when I was in college. You can say a season if you don't want to share your age. But often too many details bogs down the story. So you might be a detailed Devin. Second one, you might be a negative Natasha. This is incredibly important if you are interviewing with companies. If you accidentally end up being negative in your storytelling, it is totally something to pay attention to. Now, this is not your fault. You don't need to have any shame storms about this. But for a lot of people, the way that they tell stories is like, and that it didn't go well because my boss was a huge bummer, and the company wasn't even succeeding, and like we didn't even get lunch breaks, and half the time we were there, I just felt like, I don't know, what am I even doing here? And I couldn't even tell, and I left work really late, and you're like, all the things that I just said are facts and true, but the tone that I'm giving in my storytelling is that I really don't like what I do. And when you have the tone in your storytelling of being a negative Natasha, it ends up giving off this vibe that I don't know if I want you to be a part of what we're doing. Even if what you're telling is true, how do you tell those statements in a way that's a personal story that creates empathy, as opposed to creating the feeling that like, I'm just kind of complaining? A lot of storytelling is just complaining. And that when you realize that, you're like, oh, I don't need to tell these stories anymore. I'm just complaining. Like, I'm just telling the same stories over and over again, and they're negative, and I just need to cut them out, is a really important part of the process. The third one is too much Tina. And man, I love too much Tina because I a little bit am too much Tina, but it is a very important thing to know when you need to stop sharing. So when you're kind of getting into an overshare, and this is a skill you'll learn, as you pay attention to your stories, as you start answering these questions, as you get into enough interviews. But I have interviewed a lot of people inside of companies and worked with people and sat across people who are like, oh yeah. And then my daughter, she was there, and like, she has this very thing. Sorry. The school called me, and the school said that she has this rash. The rash is like in her armpits, and it's called they're like giving you scientific terms for the rash. And like, I don't even know Tina, you know, like this is just a really, whereas she could have said like, yeah, I'm working through some stuff with my daughter's daycare. She's been dealing with some ongoing sickness. That is a fact. And the second thing is like, oh, now I'm just thinking about like, is the rash contagious? Do you have it? Like, do you need a cream? Whatever that thing is, figure out how much the right amount is. And that word is actually tact. So having tact. Tact is, I know exactly how much to share to give you the information you need and for you to get to know me, but also not giving you too much to where I'm kind of unraveling and I'm not really sure where to head. The next one is bored Brittany. And man, it is a very, very important thing to pin right here in this session. If you do not care about your own story, no one will care about your story. If you do not believe your story is exciting or that you are eventful and important and awesome, no one will care. And I hear people all the time, and it breaks my heart when someone says, so tell me about yourself. I see people go, I don't know. I mean, I'm from Ohio, but I moved to Florida. I've been doing this for 5 years. Yeah. I'm like, you had such an opportunity just then to give me anything about you that is interesting. And I have a core belief that every single person is interesting. So you have the missed opportunity there. Like every single person has a unique story and is wildly interesting. And when we can really believe that and harness that and believe our own story is important, we have to come in with that confidence. If you are bored with your own stories, no one will listen to them. If you do not believe your own story is interesting, no one will listen to it because you are telling me with your words and actions that your stories are boring. And that is something that is very important to come up against. Just two more. Mysterious Maria. This is very important. Mysterious Maria, I've interacted with her all the time. I actually really love Mysterious Marias. I'm married to a mysterious person. But it's the people who like are incredibly private and want to be guarded, but also don't really know what to say. And it adds all these layers that ends up being like, hi. Oh yeah, no, I'm good. Oh yeah, I've worked here for 3 years. Oh, that's all. And now I don't know her and I'm a story seeker. So I'm like, Maria, where are you from? Where'd you come from? What'd you have for lunch? What happened, Maria? You know, sometimes I'm too much for Maria. But it is important that Maria knows that she can scoot her chair forward and give us enough information. This is the perfect example of this is my husband is an extreme introvert and shy. So not just one or the other, but both. And when he tells me a story, it often is like this, like, oh yeah, there was like a crazy car accident. And I'm like, where? It's like, oh, down the street. With who? Oh, a neighbor. A neighbor? Were you there? Yeah. What? Were the kids with you? Yeah. And I'm like, I needed all that information right before the car accident down the street story. Like I needed to know all of that. Like just give me a who, what, where, and then build it up a little bit and then tell me what happened. But instead, it's just his own information. He's a little bit mysterious and he processes it mysteriously. He's very logical. He gives you only the tiniest amount of information he can feasibly come up with. And then we have to kind of draw it out. So think about more of how you can contribute if you tend to be mysterious. The last one is Rushed Randa. And sweet Randa, I'm also her, but that's because I talk very fast, as you can tell already. But she's incredibly concerned about taking up too much airtime. And when you realize, especially as women in the workforce, there is space for us. You can take a breath while you're talking and people will continue to listen to you. You are allowed to slow down and think. You can take the time to think if you would like. Rushed Randa tends to answer questions like, so Randa, tell me about yourself. Oh, I moved, I have a dog, I have a kid. Sorry, I'm done. And we apologize often, but really the truth is in this setting, no matter which one you identify yourself as, or you're like, hey, I'm a little bit of all these things, there are ways for us to take up more space, give context, elevate ourselves, and share our stories. So maybe you can drop in the chat, what type of storyteller did you identify with? Would anyone be up for doing that? Seeing if there's any answers there. Katie, if there's anyone who puts anything in there.
Yeah, we have some detailed Devons. We have someone who, a few detailed Devons. Someone who used to be a detailed Devon and morphed into a mysterious Maria when they realized they did too much. Oh, need to know Nelly. Someone made up a new one. That's
good. I like that. I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, this is good. I mean, do you see people like, it seems like some people kind of have morphed. Is that typical? Like you see people shifting? Like,
yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, but there's really good growth in shifting. And then there's just like trauma. So there's people who grow and start to become clearer and more confident. And then if somebody goes from like a detailed Devin to a mysterious Maria, somebody in the middle might have shut them down. And so I just want to own space for that too. For some women, like they might not have ever been oversharers. They might just have been with somebody who didn't want them to share at all. And so when you can really own that, like, hey, I was in a work environment that like, I wasn't able to share what was happening in my life and story, but I want to work in an environment where I can share what's happening in my life and story. And that's just a huge philosophical shift. And we often get shut down. Whereas there is just a healthy balance that sometimes isn't your fault. It's the people, the environment you're working in's fault. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. A question that I had as you were kind of like going through this. So like, particularly for, maybe the negative Natasha or the bored Brittany, I don't know, but you say that owning that confidence piece and really getting excited about, or like feeling like you actually have something of value to share. Do you have any tips for those that are tuning in to like get more confident or find the confidence to like start or like, dig in to see what they see as valuable or exciting? Like confidence, I know is a thing a lot of us struggle with. So any tips there?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, it is some internal work. Like it is the story before the story. It is your own internal, like, oh, I'm a contributing member of this team. I am valuable here. I am good at what I do. Like it is changing some of those narratives, because for a lot of us, our narratives are like, nobody cares. It doesn't matter. No one's listening. I got to get out of here. Like those are our internal narratives. And so I think some of it is the internal work first. Like, how do we talk about our internal stories? What are the stories we're telling ourselves? All of that. And then another part of it is just rehearsal, practice, and tone. So some of it is just sitting up, raising your voice a little bit, and speaking a little bit slower. So it is tone, it is presentation, but it's also the internal work of like, do I feel that way? Do I feel confident? And, a lot of people are like, I'm going to fake it till I make it. And there's a lot of study behind that as well. But I think going in with that confidence, especially if you're in an interview process, you have to present yourself as somebody excellent, because if you don't believe it, the company will not believe it. And that is the kind of thing that interview coaching might help. Just role playing with anyone in your life, having your best friend ask you all the questions, and having you sit up straight and tall and answer everyone. And a lot of them have stories in them, is really a helpful tool to build confidence. Because then at least your best friend can say like, that was a good answer. And you're like, that was a good answer. And I did not realize it. And you can really sit with someone and get some feedback, because a lot of this is just like, you're talking to no one, that's a hard feeling. So I think rehearsal might help too.
Yeah, that's all good points. All right. One more question before we go on. This just came up in the chat. But on the flip side to that confidence sort of equation, do you have any thoughts or advice or anything to share around potentially coming off as overconfident in your stories? Any thoughts you could share there?
So there's one thing that's like storytelling and sharing, and then there's another thing that's like bragging. And the second thing, some of us accidentally do, a lot of us accidentally do, but also we've kind of started to view it as a currency. I think anytime a story involves putting somebody else down, we shouldn't tell it anymore. So if any part of your story is, I am the best, and here's why I'm the best, and here's some people who I've beat, I think we don't need that story anymore. That's my personal thought. Also, I don't think that numbers and money tell great stories. So that is like controversial in the coaching world, but I don't really love people whose entire pitch is, I'm a 7-figure earner who works with 8-figure earners, who works with $10,000 million earners, and all we do is earn money. And I'm like, I see what you're saying there, but like, what in the world do you do, and what is happening? So like, those are just, that feels more like, let me prove to you right off the bat that I'm a really big deal. And I don't know if that's really what we want to do. I think we just want to elevate ourselves and our personal stories. And if people find us interesting, great, let's work together and make an impression. Because we really see the best in each other and want to hear from people, and work with really great high-level people. That's a great skill to have, but I don't know if we need to do it in such a way that we end up being braggy but I mean, it's tough, because I do really want to create confidence, and For some people, confidence feels braggy, but really they needed that to feel more confident. But for some people, they end up going way over here and end up talking exclusively about themselves. Here's a quick tip. So in storytelling, if you're in business, if you are in business and you are telling a story, you are almost never the hero. The client is almost always the hero. So if you are talking about what you do, like what Katie, you're a great example of the Mom Project, the hero of your stories are the moms getting jobs. So that is who the hero is. But you could say, like, I have helped a bunch of people, you know, just find amazing, and I walked them through and I gave them the skills, which you would never do, but like, and I was the one who did it and I did a great job. Whereas instead you could tell the story of like, oh, I was able to work with 5,000 moms this year and they landed their dream jobs and they are killing it in the workforce. And it had been a really hard year for a lot of them. And they have changed the game and they are changing the way that companies work today. And you said the same thing, but you weren't the hero. So when you can really take yourself out of being the hero of the story, that does help with that kind of tone, brag feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
What were you saying?
No, we've got a lot of great questions, but let's keep moving along because we can certainly get to that at the end.
Okay, let's workshop this. Does everyone have their pens and papers? Let's just go. You ready to do it? Okay. So this is a part of the blog that I contributed to the Mom Project. You can look at this afterwards. You can read all this content. It's here. But I want to do this together in real time because I think this is the kind of thing that you'll like read once and then you'll think I should do that and you'll never do it again. But if you're here in real time and you have to do it, the accountability is helpful. So you're going to grab a piece of paper and you are going to write the number 1 through 6 on it. You can space it out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Enough for you to be able to write a sentence after every number. So maybe skip a couple lines if you have lines. I'm more of a like blank paper person versus a lined paper person, but this happens to be lined. Follow your heart. So are you lined or blank, Katie?
I have a grid actually, which
Whoa.
I really like. Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's when you know you're next level and probably incredibly organized. I would just assume about you. So yes, that's impressive. So we are going to do 6 sentences that will help you answer this question. So we are going to go through like 6 key parts to answering. So tell me about yourself. And hopefully at the end of these 6 sentences, you are going to have a paragraph that you can memorize, read over and over again, clarify, craft. And then the second you walk into an interview, which I know some of you have interviews like next Tuesday. And I just want to say that out loud and hold that in your heart with you. Like it's so fresh and real. You're like, oh my gosh, right now I have an interview very soon. Tell me this. So let's start. Sentence number 1 is, hi, your name, what you do, and where you're from. This is called personal context. So you are going to give everyone personal context. This helps the audience ground you. Like, where do you live? I need to be able to picture your life in 1 sentence. So I want you to actually answer this question. I'm going to give you a second. So, hi, I'm Katie. I am a storytelling coach. I live in Orange, California with my family. Take a second and write that down. This is very important here. I want you to put an asterisk right here at the end of it. And the asterisk needs to be, make eye contact with every single person in the room. So when someone says, oh, Katie, I'm so glad you're here. So we're all here, Jenny from billing, her from HR. Tell us about yourself. You are going to look up and you are going to look at every single person in the room in the eyes. And if that is in Zoom, you can look at all of those squares. But often, for some reason, when people start to answer this question, they get so overwhelmed that their answer feels like this. Okay, I'm from Southern California. And it takes so long to re-engage again, whereas you really want to set the tone with eye contact right here. So you can look around, and this is the easiest one to memorize. Everyone should know how to answer this question right away. So that's the first sentence. Eye contact is huge here. Number 2, say your experience. So now you're like, Katie, how do I do that in 2 sentences? That's impossible. Because and this is where a lot of my clients get the most tripped up. They want to put their resume in there, so tell you about yourself. But when you are in an interview, you do not need to, in the first 1 second, read your resume. They have your resume. It's in front of them. What you need to do here is share some facts and elevate yourself a bit. So a great example for this is like, share how long you've been doing what you're doing. 1 thing that you're really good at, or an award you've won, or something that's unique and cool about the skill that you do, a great company you've worked for. come up with some sort of elevating fact right here. So my example is, I've been a nutritionist for 10 years and I went to Duke University. This is often where people, like if they went to a big school, they like to say it, or they say, I've been in the field for 15 years, or I have worked at a myriad of amazing companies, or I actually was trained at Facebook, or I spent 5 years helping a company's profit grow exponentially. And this is pretty tricky for a lot of women. It's hard to come up with a sentence that elevates them. So I think about this for a second, write something down, even if you're like, okay, I have a lot of experience. I'm really exceptional at Excel. I am really good at Google Docs. I have trained on this very specific skill. Here is one thing that does separate me. It elevates me a little bit and it gives them some context on what I'm good at. So share some of your experience. Here is how I help people and why I love it. So this sometimes connects with the first ones. This gets a little bit different, but I want you to sit with, so let's go back to the Excel analogy, right? Like, I'm Jenny. I have been in billing for 10 years. I am excellent at Excel. I help companies organize their thoughts. I help numbers stay in line. I help moms connect to their dream jobs. I help people learn how to have a healthy relationship with food. How do you help people and why do you love it? I help people learn to tell their stories and gain confidence. How do you help people and why do you love it? Write it down. Got it? Okay. So this is where story crafting comes in. This is where I will stand on this forever. This is the hill I will die on, but you should say something right here that is deep and true about you. So this is where I think culture is shifting in office environments, in corporate. I think if you have had something very significant in your life happen, you should be able to share it in a sentence. And that, what I say here is something about it that's deep and true. This is a part of your story, and be honest here. Are you a new mom? Did you survive cancer? Are you a part of a very unique and compelling community? This is where you're allowed to say something very big and real. Like, if this is a nutritionist, in my own life, I struggled with food addiction, but I learned how to create a healthy relationship with food. Or for you, that might be, I was thriving in the workforce for 10 years, got pregnant, had a kid, and I realized I really wanted to stay at home for 8 months. And now I'm back and ready to do both. You might want to share something real here that feels honest. You want to go deep. What's amazing about this, now that I've seen this play out enough times, is that this is often where people think, you know that great saying, people don't remember what you say, they remember how you made them feel. This is the moment where people start to feel like they know you and care about you. It builds this empathy bridge. It makes them draw into you a little bit. It's like, I've seen, I have a client who was interviewing at Microsoft. She's super high level in her 60s. She's unbelievable. And she had been in the field for 15 years, and she had never said out loud that she's a breast cancer survivor. And some of the work that we did together is that in this, she was able to say, I've worked at Microsoft, Facebook, Google. I oversee systems, teams, analysts. She gave me all these words I've never said before in my life. I had to help her say them. And then she said, I am a 5-year breast cancer survivor, but also lost my mom to breast cancer in the last year, which is why I wasn't working. Now I am walking through systems analysts and ready to partner with an amazing company. Whatever that line was for her, she learned to say the really true and hard thing. But here's how it gets easier. The next thing is something light and creates levity. So the next sentence is, I also have 9 English bulldogs. So hers really was, I also have climbed all the mountains in Washington. So she's an avid hiker. So this is where you can build connections with people. That what I love about this one too is this is like your small talk gift. So right here, you talk about a funny niche. Like, I'm very invested in Disney. I really love the TV show, The Bachelor. Whatever this is, you take that really deep thing and you match it with this really light thing. And now everyone in the room feels like they know something about you. And afterwards, they can ask you a simple question. This is where I've seen across the board, people say things like, for me, it's like, I love tiny living and I'm a minimalist. Afterwards, after a sentence like that, people come up to me and say, my mom has RVs. And I'm like, no way, how fun. And now we have a way to connect with somebody in the room, and it creates a small talk access point. It's incredibly important that you have a fun, light sentence here. I collect cars, I knit. I'm very into Ted Lasso season 2. Whatever it is, you're gonna say something fun here, okay? Light and levity. Then the last sentence is you are going to express gratitude and enthusiasm for the company. So this is where you are going to make it all about them. I am so happy to be here at Facebook, and I love what this company does, and I can't wait to hear more. I am so happy to be here at J.R. Morgan and Associates, and I really believe in what your company is doing. I am so happy to be a part of this interview, and I've already really felt a great environment from this team. So you end your so tell me about themselves by having them think about themselves, and then they like what you said more. It's just true. When they're thinking about themselves in the end, they end up liking themselves more. So hopefully you now have 6 sentences on your piece of paper. You are literally going to read through those 6 sentences, and you have a 20-second answer to this question. So we can workshop through this. Katie, we can do some Q&As, see what people are stuck on, where there's hiccups, all of it.
For sure. Got lots of good questions coming in. So, sorry, let me go back up. So particularly, and you touched on it a little bit, but love to just hear a little bit more. So first, for those who maybe are they're looking to re-enter the workforce after they're coming off of a break, what they're kind of like, what should they say they do if the most recent experience has been maybe a stay-at-home mom or something along those lines?
Good. I would say be honest and be confident in your honest answer. So if you were to say, I have 5 years of experience in accounting, but for the last year, I've been a stay-at-home mom, running our household, taking care of my kids. I wanted to be really present in the season, but I continue to work on my skills, and I'm excited to re-enter the workforce and do both. So I really believe in this both language, because it's not like I was a stay-at-home mom and now all of a sudden I'm not a mom, I'm just going to come to work. We really do have to elevate that. And now I'm ready and I'm excited to re-enter the workforce and continue to be a parent. There isn't a one or the other. It really is a both and. So I would say, own it. Say how long you've been home, why you were home, why that mattered to you. Say it was really important for me to be home for a season with my kids. And now I'm really excited to contribute to this company in a way I haven't in a while. And you can be totally honest about that. I think honesty is the best policy. I think it matters less about what you say and how you feel about how you say it is the truth. So go at it with confidence. My husband is a stay-at-home dad full time. And so at dinner parties, I see him answer this question. I have been watching this, and we've had a lot of conversations about this because he'll sit across from friends who are like, oh yeah, our company just broke $1 million. Danny, how's work for you? And he's like, oh, yeah, I'm not working right now. I actually get to stay home with the kids. I help with some of Katie's business, but I love what I get to do, and I get to contribute to our family in a different way. Whatever that is, there really has to be a confidence behind it, and it's true. We don't know what to say. And something that he said once that I've never forgotten is he said, I don't wish I was saying those words, but it's kind of nice to be able to say those words. And I'm like, what a great statement that for a lot of us, we just wish we could say like, I have 15 years of experience and I have my MBA and I have VCA and an RDA. We just want all those letters and words, but like, that's not necessarily the life we want to live or the experience we have. So we have to come at that with confidence to say, I stayed home for a season, I was caring for my family, and I'm really excited to see how I can contribute to this company.
Yeah. Another question that came up like a little earlier, but I think it pertains here is like someone said they're very likable, like have good interviews, but aren't getting offers. Any tips for like maybe more succinctly highlighting specific skills without getting too granular, like in this whole kind of outline?
Yeah. I think people hear all the time, like follow up and ask why you didn't get an offer. And I think everyone hears all the time, like no one tells you. So I want to empathize with that. Like I would say follow up, find out, but I'm hearing from my clients left and right that like they do that. And everyone says like, we just went with someone else by. So I don't know if there's a lot of weight to that, but I think sharing about your own life and making an impression and telling your story is a great way to do that, because that person then has more empathy for you and remembers you out of a stack of papers better. So you have to remember going into it that like you're one of 27 people on their Excel sheet. How do you make an impression so that your name is memorable in that list of people? So how do you share more of your story? How do you talk about your experience? What does that feel like? Really great answers in interviews are actually stories. So when someone says like, tell me about a time, like whenever questions start with that and you're like, what? Okay, I was once in a company and I had to solve this problem, and here is how I did it, and here's what that felt like, but then here's what I learned, and here's what I'd bring to your company. So I think just continuing to tell more stories in a way that's concise and compelling. I know that doesn't answer cleanly, but I think I know more of their situation. I can help.
Yeah. All right. Just looking back into the side. There's so many great questions. Also, for all of you who maybe we're really actually taking a lot of time to write your answers for each of the things, you'll get a recording of this as part of your RSVP, but we'll also put the link to the article that Katie wrote into this chat, so that it includes all 6 of these steps. You can go back and do it on your own time. So it's good. I'm glad to hear people are really doing it. It seems like a lot of people are getting stuck on number 4 and number 5 in that, specifically number 4, because it feels really vulnerable.
Yeah.
So there.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the storytelling ground rules is we speak from scars, not from wounds. So that is a Nadia Bolz-Weber quote. But I tell my clients all the time, if something big and true happened in your life, but you still cry a lot about it, or there's lawyers involved, like it might not be time to talk about it, like there's time when stories should be born. So if something is, and I would never say don't cry, because I think we all need to just be more okay with people crying sometimes. So that's my thought on storytelling. Like, just if someone's crying, everyone get over it. But I think if you do feel like you can't control or contain your emotion when speaking about it, that might be the kind of thing that you want to continue to work through in therapy, or you want to process with somebody close to you so it feels a little bit less scary. But I've had people cry in interviews and I hired them. So I'm like, I think talking about your truth in your heart and like where you're at is so valuable and important. And I think this does feel daunting and scary. And for some people, they're like, I've never been through anything traumatic. I have a pretty normal life. Like, I live in suburbia and I don't really know what's like true or real about me. But there is so much. It's just about how you categorize it. There's so much about you that you've been through and experienced. You've gone through heartache and loss and failures. And what have those things taught you? So that's just a great way to look at it.
I like that piece about really focusing on what those experiences have taught you. And that's really interesting. I mean, something been thinking about as we kind of go through all this, because I do think, depending on the industry, like we're trying to break down barriers and, like make everything a little more human. And there still are some industries that I think are going to remain a little more rigid and old school, private for longer. How do you, like, what's your recommendation for those who maybe are in industry more like that they're maybe looking for work or trying to elevate up, or maybe are trying to make a career pivot, so are kind of testing the waters in a few areas? Any suggestions of having different versions of your story ready, and like any advice you can share there?
I would think through a story exchange. So when you head into an environment, think to yourself, how much would this person be willing to tell me? And that might be your baseline. I think everyone should go a little above that. But if that person is like super guarded, and I've worked with people who I'm like, I literally only know this guy's name. He is 50 and like he wants me to be his coach, and he's still not willing to tell me anything about his life. I'm not going to I will stay guarded as well, just in EQ. Like, oh, I know that you want that a little bit more privacy there, so I'm going to be a little bit more private here. So I think absolutely there should be adjustments based on the room you're in. Like, for some people, like, they're going to share an answer to this question in like a women's connect group over wine at night. This is going to be like a bigger, longer answer to this question with more heart and story. But then you're the next day going to go sit with somebody and they're going to say like, so tell me about yourself. Why do you think you deserve this job? And you should still give some context to who you are in your personal life, but you might not need to share something as deep or as real or as authentic. You might want to just keep it more light and connected. So I think use your EQ in that room to see what feels best. Keep it guarded, especially, a great storytelling trick is just ask questions. Ask them questions back. See what they say. Find out what they're thinking, hear from them. So hear their story. That will help.
Just realized I'm on mute. I saw in the chat, just going back to that feedback thing. I know we kind of, I wanted to drop a tip. I feel like I said this in the session, but for those of you who maybe have a great interview and then after the fact get no feedback, or maybe they're not moving forward with you as a candidate, one tip I heard that actually is really great is at the end of an interview, while you're still on the line with them or in the room with them or whatever it may be, just say like, is there anything that we've talked about today or anything right now that's, you're potentially like holding you back from moving me on to the next round? So you can actually get that feedback like then and there.
Yeah. That's a great idea.
Not like putting them on the spot, right? It's not like, tell me what I did wrong. It's, is there anything kind of hold it back or whatever. So just a pro tip there. Sorry, let me get back to the questions. So, all right, this one, sorry. Great question. How do we answer, and you touched on this a little bit, but I would love to explore this more. How do we answer questions without aging ourselves? I worry about ageism and getting overlooked if I mention anything where you can pin an age on. So
yeah, that's a great point. Especially when you're talking about experience, because if you have 25 years experience in a field, you're already saying, you know, something about yourself. That's such a great question. I think it's a real concern. I think if you are genuinely concerned, like you're headed into a really young work environment and you're like, oh no, I think there might be some ageism here I need to come up against in an interview, then I would probably leave out some context. I would probably say, like, I've been doing this for a lot of years. I have a lot of experience. I have been working with companies for years on end. I have you can always say 10 plus years, you know, like a general loose term, like 15 plus years. And that little plus is like, is it plus 25? Who knows? But you can use a little bit less of that. And then you wouldn't need to, in a story, say I was 37 in an interview. You would say something like, at my prior company.
Yeah, that's great. So this question, it keeps popping up. Any other advice or like inspiration you can share about just like being more confident when you're talking about your motherhood experience or motherhood journey as part of your story?
Yeah, that's great. So I have two kids, 5 and 2 years old, Gracie and Lainey. And I think with Gracie, my first kid, it felt like a little bit scarier and harder because I was like, I think honestly, I wasn't very confident talking about my motherhood because I didn't really realize I was a mom yet. You know how it takes a while to even realize you are a mom? You're like, wait, is this what I do? Am I a mother? And so I think be gracious with yourself as you figure out how to talk about it confidently, because the truth is, like, a lot of us aren't even confident in our own motherhood yet, let alone talking about it to an employer, because it feels really fragile and hard. And there are days where it's difficult. Like I had many days this week where I was like, is this working? Am I being a good mother here? So it's hard then to go in a room and be like, I've been really doing a great job for my family. You know, like that is a hard thing to land, because it's our own internal work of like, how do I even feel about my own motherhood? So that I think is a piece of it, to think through that in your head. But then I think in a room, you have to remember when you're telling someone something, you have to, in your storytelling, convince them that it was really good. So you have to say, like, I spent a year at home. I'm so glad I got to be with my kids and my family. It really set us up for success in the years to come. And I'm really excited to join the workforce and do both.
Yeah.
How I just said that gives you confidence that I am confident in the decisions that I made. And when you are confident in the decisions that you make, you will serve companies better. If you feel like, I didn't know, I was really confused and I was super torn, and then I was like, I am going to stay home, I'm not, and then I did, and then it was bad, it was really bad, and so now I'm back. That's a different story. And so you really want to create, that might be the true story that you tell in a year, but for right now, I think saying like, we knew the best decision at the time would be for me to stay home, and I knew it was right, and so I did it. We set up our family really well, and I'm ready to do both.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it does come back to confidence and owning your decisions and being proud about it. And I know it does take some time and work, and it's not always easy. I mean, I work at the Mom Project, and I feel like I even sometimes downplay like my kids sometimes.
Right.
And like I work at the Mom Project.
Right.
Something that I'm not leading with. So it's something we all have to work through. So that's great. One question, do you recommend using, this sentence formula in a LinkedIn profile or on a resume summary, or do you think they're better served in kind of this like person-to-person format?
That's a great question. So a really important thing is that, so I do a lot of speaking coaching and storytelling coaching. Things can be written to be read or written to be spoken. And I see people mess this up all the time because they end up saying something in their pitch like this: I elevate and execute brands towards excellence and professionalism for the highest level of execution. And I'm like, did you just read me your LinkedIn profile out loud? That was written to be read. That was not written to be spoken. So the work we just did together was written to be spoken. So this is for speaking. You can totally hone this, craft this. You can turn it into your Instagram bio, all of it. You can take tiny parts of this and rewrite it. But those are two different things, which is kind of a hard thing to understand as you go. But honestly, when you read something out loud, if it does not feel natural, you need to change it. If it feels like you're reading a blog out loud, then you need to rewrite it for being spoken. So I think it can kind of go both ways.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I cannot believe the hour is over. This has been tremendous. So many great just pieces of advice and wisdom and this tried and true formula. I'm really excited for all of you, watching out there today to kind of craft your story. But yeah, I mean, Katie, this was wonderful. Everyone that joined, thank you so much. We'll be sending the follow-up email if you want to get in touch with Katie separately. All that info will be in there. And yeah, I hope we need to do another session, Katie, because I feel like this is we barely scratched the surface.
Yes.
But yeah, thank you again, Katie. Thank all of you for being a part of the Mom Project, and enjoy your weekend, everyone.